The one big, beautiful bill passes. What does that mean for you and me? That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt. And I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. And today, economy. The House approved the bill 218 to 214, and that's after the Senate approved the bill 51 to 50. Vice President J.D. Vance had to cast the tiebreaker vote, so it passed 51-50, and President Trump signed it into law. So it extends the 2017 Tax Cuts and Job Act that we saw under President Trump. Some estimates say that had that not extension passed, Americans would have experienced on average, 22% tax hike, right? That's huge. That's significant. So that alone is a huge win for this administration. But what else was in there? Remember, the bill was like 900 some odd pages. Does anybody even read that? That in itself is worthy of a show, right? A Bold and Blunt show, talking about the ridiculously large pieces of legislation that congressional members are tasked to pass in speedy manner. You know they're not reading it, right? And that's why we get so many things stuck into legislation that we don't find out about until years down the road. So that's worthy of a Bold and Blunt show on its own. But today, it's all about the one big, beautiful bill that is now passed. What does it mean for you and me and our children and our future generations and our economy, both present and in the coming couple of years that Trump has left in office? Before I get into all that, I want to quickly mention, if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at Real Life Network. That is Pastor Jack Hibbs's Calvary Chapel Chino Hills Church in California, their news-based outreach. Well, it's faith-based news outreach, right? That has a very notable and highly esteemed lineup. I'm very happy to say Bold and Blunt is among that lineup. So check out Bold and Blunt, as well as all the other faith-based podcasts and news offerings that Real Life Network puts out. But you can get Bold and Blunt by subscribing to my newsletter at Washington Times. Just go to the bottom of the WashingtonTimes.com main webpage, find the newsletter section, click on it, and look for Bold and Blunt with Cheryl Chumley. That is my newsletter. You will get, by entering your email address, my commentaries and my Bold and Blunt podcasts delivered right to your email box Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 3 times a week. And of course, you can get Bold and Blunt wherever podcasts are available. Let's read from CBS News just a bit. At the center, the big, beautiful bill is an extension of Trump's 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which was slated to sunset at the end of this year. The legislation would make most of the tax cuts permanent, while increasing spending for border security, defense, and energy production. And I'm going to direct your attention to that word permanent, right? Because is anything permanent when it comes to tax cuts? Keep that in your mind, right? I mean, how permanent are things that Congress does? How permanent are things that the executive office does or do, right? Do. The bill is particularly paid for by significant cuts to healthcare and nutrition programs like Medicaid and the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, CBS writes. The Congressional Budget Office estimates the bill would add $3.4 trillion to federal deficits over the next 10 years and leave millions without health insurance. Boo freaking who? Because what we're talking about when we're saying leave millions without health insurance, first off, again, I want to go back to pre-Obamacare days where it was understood that if you had a health issue, you could go to the emergency room at any hospital in America and not be turned away. You had to be admitted, right? So let's just say that if you had a health problem, you could go to the hospital and have it taken care of. As far as health insurance goes, right, prior to Obamacare and Republicans caving to the socialism that Obamacare ushered into this country's healthcare system, you could opt in or opt out of health insurance. It was a choice, right? When you worked, your employer offered health insurance and you could opt in. You could choose whether or not to obtain health insurance. And if you didn't want to, well, then you paid out of pocket for your medical expenses. That's called freedom, right? Free choice. That's called freedom. And then Obama came along and made everybody have to sign up for some sort of insurance, which the insurance companies absolutely loved and the hospitals absolutely loved. But those who were responsible for their own medical care for years and years absolutely hated it, because what it meant was all the deductibles, all the private sector insurance costs just skyrocketed, right? Instead of having deductibles that were doable for, say, a family of four of $1,000 out-of-pocket expenses for the year before insurance kicked in, you started having deductibles of $10,000 a year and even more for really the gold plan. So what Obamacare did was screw over the people in America who were responsible and who cherished freedom and the right to choose and have control over medical care. And it allowed the people who didn't want to work, it allowed those who didn't want to pay their own way a free ride, and at the expense, of course, of those who worked hard. Socialism, right? Ain't it great? Ain't it great? So when we're talking about, and I love how CBS puts this, when we're talking about the bill is partially paid for by significant cuts to healthcare and nutrition programs like Medicaid and SNAP, right? And how it adds $3.4 trillion by leaving millions without health insurance. We're talking really about whittling down these federal benefit programs that are not entitlements, right? You're not owed them. We're talking about whittling away the corruption and casting aside, removing those from these programs, these taxpayer-funded programs, those who should not be on those programs anyhow, those people who can work. They can provide for their own food for their children. They can provide for their own health care. We're talking about the expansions that Barack Obama did to Medicaid when he opened the doors for tens of thousands of more able-bodied young men to jump on the Medicaid rolls. And they were allowed to receive taxpayer-funded health services without having to work for them. And so what Trump did with his one big beautiful bill, and what Congress did, Republicans in Congress did, they added a provision where if you want to receive Medicaid, if you want to continue to receive Medicaid, you have to work, right? You have to work for it. I mean, what's wrong with that, right? The provision, Fox News reports, requires able-bodied, childless adults between the ages of 18 and 64 to work at least 80 hours a month. 80 hours a month. Some people work that a week, right? To be eligible to receive Medicaid benefits. Individuals can also meet the requirement by participating in community service, going to school, or engaging in a work program. This is probably one of the best aspects to me of this bill, aside from tax cuts, right? Aside from continuing tax cuts. That's always a great thing for people who work for a living in America. But changing the attitude, changing the mindset, changing that entitlement attitude and mindset that has really seeped into America over the last decade or so with Democrats in charge. Go back to Barack Obama days. That's where it got really bad, right? That's where it got really entitlement minded, that if you live and breathe, then you're entitled to taxpayer-funded benefits from cradle to grave, and then open the door to illegals and all these illegals that Barack Obama and Joe Biden let into America. We're fed on a daily dose of that entitlement attitude. You owe me. You're big, wealthy America. You owe me. So, turning back the clock on that is a good thing. We got to get rid of that attitude, that mindset in America. And I love this portion of the bill. I love the idea of making those who take tax handouts, right? Taxpayer handouts, because that's what they are. They're not entitlements. They're handouts. They're charity. And they're actually government forced charity, because we don't get a say as a taxpayer, right? When it comes time to take things out of our paychecks, we don't really get a say over Social Security or Medicare, right? And now government comes along and takes our tax dollars and uses them for Medicaid as well, for those who don't have the means to provide their own health care. And it's supposed to be a program that is just for a short time to help people get back on their feet. And I think most Americans can sympathize with that or have compassion for that, and they're okay with that. But it's the Barack Obama style expansion of these programs that puts it in the minds of the recipients that you owe me this now. You give it to me for a short time and now you owe it. You can't take it back. Well, guess what? Yes, we can. President Donald Trump has made that clear, and so have Republicans in Congress made that clear with this newly passed big, beautiful bill, that if you take tax-funded Medicaid benefits, that the clock is ticking on how long you are able to receive them. And as a condition of receiving them, you have to work. And like I said, we're only talking 80 hours a month, 20 hours a week. Goodness, kids in high school, at least when I was growing up, kids in high school regularly worked 20 hours a week, for crying out loud. So that's just one aspect of this bill. There are, 899 plus more pages to get through. And to help understand and break down what's in the bill, how it's going to impact you and me and the country at large in the coming years, is Tim Head, President and CEO of Unify.us. It is a new organization. You should check it out. I give the website at the end of this podcast. But right now, let's hear from Tim. Tim Head, thank you so much for being back on Bold and Blunt. Always great to have you here.
Good to be with you, Cheryl. And man, it's fun. I'll say as a fan and kind of an onlooker from the outside, it's fun to see your podcast do as well as it has been and continues to do. So thanks for having me.
Oh, that's very kind of you to say. I appreciate that. And I look forward so much to talking about your expertise in analysis here with this one big, beautiful bill, because it's stretched, 900 plus pages. So I don't think there's anybody in Congress who knows everything that's in there. But just from your perspective, as the CEO and president of Unify.us, talk a little bit about what you like about this Now Act, what you don't.
Well, this is definitely eating an elephant here. It is a big bill, as you alluded to, and I think that I tend to think of it both from a policy and the economic perspective, as well as the political side. And I think that I'll probably start with the political piece, and then we'll get a little more granular on the policy and economic side.
Sure.
But that I think you have to just say there are probably four things for this current Congress, meeting with Senator Thune and with Speaker Johnson, and this is you would say this piece, and then the conflicts right now, both Russia, Ukraine, as well as the Middle East with Israel, and what started with Hamas, obviously now emphasizing Iran. I would say, the third piece is just the economy writ large, which largely is going to impact inflation or be influenced by inflation, but there's other elements to that as well, and then the passage of this bill would be the fourth piece. And so, and ironically, of all four of those, this is the one that the White House had the most "quote unquote" control over. So, for them to get a win, for President Trump and his team to get this win relatively early, 6 months in. So, but that's relatively early to have such a monumental piece of legislation, and then he also has time both for kind of the political shards, if you will, to start to kind of like break and settle. And then secondly, for the economy itself, for the tax piece of this to start to matriculate into business practices across the country and in certain instances around the world. It's very, very, very important for this to have passed and to pass pretty early like this. And so, that's the reason why you saw him flex any and every muscle that he had to flex, including, taking individual members of Congress to go play rounds of golf with him, in the days leading up to the passage. So huge political win here, even though there probably will be some individual political casualties in the reelect, and probably in primaries next year.
Let's talk about the economic that you just mentioned, because of course that's huge, right? The extension of the tax cuts from 2017. How is that going to impact the average American?
Well, the average American, I think, is so if this had not passed, we would have reverted at the end of the year to previous tax cuts. And so, ironically, it's a little bit like putting people in, comfortable water, and then threatening to remove them from the comfortable water, that they actually don't feel the potential of the threat until it would have happened. So we actually averted the crisis versus sort of like implementing a crisis. So the nice thing is that we will actually continue to have the benefits not only of individual income taxes, but permanent corporate income taxes, and the income tax piece, or the corporate taxation piece was probably 750 of the 900 pages, right? I mean, it's very granular. This is how you're there's like surplus taxes in there. There are inventory taxes in there. There's kind of double excise taxes, and there's a lot going on in there that probably only speaks to like a certain number of people, but the by and large, you would say at least the tax piece for corporate America remains favorable, and then certainly the tax piece from the 2017 tax bill that passed remains the same for everyday Americans, and so all of those tax strata remain constant, and that's helpful.
Can I ask you a quick question, though, because the narrative here is that tax cuts have been made permanent, but there is no such thing as permanent, right? I mean, the next administration, the next time a budget bill has to be considered, all these permanent things could truthfully go away again, correct?
That's exactly right, but not just for the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act. So bear in mind, when we're talking about even any tax rate, we're talking about one piece of legislation, and most pieces of legislation have some sort of sunset built into it that forces the Congress usually to come back to it 2 years later, 4 years later, 10 years later, to revisit it. So this it can be changed, but instead of it just automatically sunsetting, it was set to sunset after 8 years, after 7 years of implementation. This actually does not have a sunset provision in it.
Okay.
So it still can be passed, but it doesn't automatically revert in its current passage, the 2017 passage. that did actually have like an automatic reversion.
Unlike the tax on tips, right? That and tax on overtime, those expire in 2028. Giving
Those are pretty cool.
the next president is going to have a headache on entering office as to how to deal with those two measures.
That's exactly right. So whenever you're removing taxes on something from a revenue perspective, you would say that quote unquote costs the government, because they're not going to receive the money that they were expecting to get. So it quote unquote costs them. And so to your point, in 2028, whoever happens to decide whether they want those, usually hourly workers to like them in an election cycle or not like them as much in an election cycle.
Right. It's a good little campaign gift, right, to the next incoming president. So
Either way, either party, by the way.
exactly. All right. So just opening it up, did you happen to read this entire bit of legislation? How did you parse through what was good, what was bad?
Well, so at Unify, we're a relatively new organization, six months old, with a relatively limited staff. But I would say between the team, we read the whole thing. That I read, about 20% of it, and others read about 20% of it. So that's still a couple hundred pages of reading. I'll say a lot of it is again is pretty thick. I mean, there's a lot on international on corporate U.S. based companies that do international business, which of course is most large businesses. And so, there are implications for that. But and definitely the healthcare piece is a little bit precarious politically and in policy, but I think ultimately I like what they're hoping to accomplish there. And then you have like a bunch of, you just mentioned the no tax on tips, on overtime. There's actually an interesting piece around sort of incentives for families to have babies. I love how the left tries to try to couch that or phrase that as paying people to have children. Of course, that's not the case, but it's like having being able to write off childcare or something like that. And I think ultimately that's a helpful opportunity. If you're not just going to slash income tax rates altogether, I think having a lot of bites at the apple, like what they're trying to do, is not ideal, but is the best, the next best approach, you could say.
Anything in there that the media isn't really reporting on that the media should be reporting on, particularly when it comes to interests of Christian conservatives, which is my audience, bold and blunt?
Yeah, of course. Well, first of all, I have to say, just very broadly, a lot of the measures that we've seen around DOGE, the government efficiency piece, is aimed at waste, fraud, and abuse, and really that's the target also for a good bit of this tax piece. And so I think that it's really, really important for people to understand, for all of us, all Americans, to understand that whenever you see the kind of sermon draining around, say Medicaid being walked back some. The expectation is part of the reason why the Department of Justice just last week simultaneously announced prosecutions around Medicaid and Medicare fraud is because there are about $14 billion right now under investigation of Medicare Medicaid fraud live cases right now. That's just like current live cases. That's what the Medicaid cuts are contemplating, that those levels of fraud, right? So you don't need to actually, if you're able to cut $75 billion a year, you should also be able to fund Medicaid at $75 billion a year or less, correct? And so it's important to kind of recognize what the left hand is doing in the budget is there are other practices that the right hand is trying to compensate for that. And so broadly, I think that keep that in mind. But then, again, I think you can even see certainly President Trump has strong views on this, but also your listeners are aware that Elon Musk is certainly has talked a lot about population rates and and birth rates, et cetera. One of the things that the Trump administration is trying to encourage. I mean, certainly nobody should be forced to do any of these things, but there should be we should try to incent or encourage people to, for families to grow if they want to grow, instead of disincent them. If they want to, they can't afford to. We need to eliminate those kinds of things, and that's what that kind of the newborn tax cut is trying to kind of get at, is remove some of the financial burden, because either people don't have children, or sometimes mothers make decisions around pregnancies that are difficult decisions, that we would like to remove that barrier for them.
Let's just a couple more quick questions before we wrap up. Do you think Trump had in mind, or how does this big beautiful bill work in terms of Trump's criticism of Jerome Powell? It is his ultimate economic plan for America reliant on Powell lowering interest rates? Do you think this bill will have its financial benefit if Powell does not lower rates?
Wonderful question. I'm so glad that this is one of the reasons why your interviews are good, because you kind of recognize how a lot of this is it's like a symphony. Okay, like a lot. There's not just one thing that has to happen. A lot of these things are working in concert with one another.
Right.
He certainly has put pressure. I think you could argue whether it's best for a White House to put pressure on the chairman of the Fed, but I would prefer less pressure. But I do think that what he's asking for is totally appropriate. And most economists that I deal with, that I consider trustworthy economists, not just kind of the sky's falling economists, believe that we're probably going to see a cut in rates, probably maybe half a point sometime in the fall. And if things are going well, if this tax cut has the stimulating effect that it should, and most actually believe it will, regardless of the tax cut, of the rate cut, if we see that kind of impetus by November, December, we actually are likely to see a second rate cut in the spring of next year. So if you by, say, April or May of next year, if you've seen a half a point drop at the end of this year, and then another half a point next year, you have a full basis point lower, plus this kind of tax incentive pumped into the marketplace. You actually might be able to see, by the end of next year, your growth, your GDP growth, actually might be looking at the high twos versus kind of the mid ones that we've been stagnating around for really 3 or 4 years now.
And just last question then, let's bring in the tariffs, right? Because certainly there's some influences there that go hand in hand. Talk a little bit about how maybe Trump's negotiations over tariffs might be impacted both by the passage now of this great bill, and secondly by Powell once again.
So yet again, recognizing that all these things are kind of working in concert, one of the reasons why this was an important bill to pass is because it strengthens Trump's negotiating hand in negotiating tariffs around the world. So again, all these things, they don't just live in isolation. I think most people probably understand at this point there are dozens and dozens of countries that have some problematic trade practices with the United States, but really this entire exercise is really targeted at China. And so what this, among other things, it allows Trump to kind of winnow those dozens. We've already seen a huge trade announcement with United Kingdom. Each of these new trade tariff deals brings in hundreds of millions in larger economies. So, Trump is actually raking in money right now for the United States Treasury through these tariff deals. If he's able to knock more of these individualized tariff deals off for the remainder of this year, and we go into 2020, mainly with only China remaining, the Treasury, for the first time in years, decades, will actually be pretty flush, which will be we'll just say a great problem to have. So China is going to remain a challenge, but I think that we might start seeing, major trade deals, tariff deals done, multiple times per month now that we actually have this new big, beautiful bill in place and starting to be implemented in just a few weeks.
Wow, it really does sound like the golden age of America dawning once again. That's good news. Just finished by telling people you said Unify is fairly new, 6 months old. Talk a little bit about this new organization that you head up then.
Yeah, thanks. The principles that came together to found Unify.us have all been in American politics for a good long while, almost 100 years of political experience between the four of us. But we really, really feel the need, especially right now in 2025 and beyond, to be solving problems, not just rhetorical exercises. But so we like to say that Unify stands for common sense solutions to real world problems. And so we work in a number of issues across the kind of political landscape, the justice system, American economy, our education system, K through 12, higher education, certainly a lot of things in our healthcare system, technology, intellectual property, a lot of the big ticket items that we think actually need to be addressed and not just kind of argued over. So it's been a really eventful, we'll just say, first 6 months. Already seen about 40 pieces of legislation passed in states across the country, and we're starting to see more and more movement on federal stuff as well.
Wow, that's pretty influential so quickly. And I'm on the website now, unifyus.us, and I'm just becoming acquainted with it, and it's definitely worth a visit. I really appreciate you taking the time to be on Bold and Blunt and explaining this massive bill in layman's terms. Thank you so much, Tim.
Always so good to be with you, Cheryl, and have a great rest of the day today.
You too. And that's another Bold and Blunt. Remember, if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at Real Life Network, at WashingtonTimes.com, and of course, wherever podcasts are available. Tune in next time. In the meanwhile, don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold.